almost 50 years after his grandmother Indira Gandhi coined the famous Garibi Hatao slogan for the Congress, Rahul Gandhi today announced a new minimum income scheme for the poorest Indians, which he says will be the final assault on poverty. Spelling out details of the scheme, which he had first talked about some months ago, Rahul Gandhi said that if the Congress comes to power, then 20% of India's poorest families will get 72,000 rupees a year or 6,000 rupees a month. This is so that no family falls below 12,000 rupees a month as far as its income is concerned. The scheme will cover 5 crore families. That means it would benefit nearly 25 crore people. The scheme has been called NYAY or justice. So essentially, this doesn't mean that poor families are going to get 12,000 rupees a month. It means that if a family, say, makes 6,000 rupees a month currently, the government would then chip in the rest of that money to raise their monthly family income to 12,000 rupees. Let's listen to what Rahul Gandhi said today.
कांग्रेस पार्टी गारंटी करती है कि हिंदुस्तान के 20% सबसे गरीब परिवारों को, शौक मत होना, अभी धमाका बढ़ने जा रहा है, 20% सबसे गरीब परिवारों को हर साल 72,000 रुपए देने जा रही है। अगर नरेंद्र मोदी जी हिंदुस्तान के सबसे अमीर लोगों को पैसा दे सकते हैं, तो कांग्रेस पार्टी देश के सबसे गरीब लोगों को पैसा दे सकती है। दिस इज अ ग्राउंड ब्रेकिंग आइडिया। ये ऐतिहासिक दिन है। हिंदुस्तान पे फाइनल असॉल्ट ऑन पॉवर्टी इज नाउ बिगिनिंग।
Well, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley hit back at Rahul Gandhi this evening, basically saying that the history of the Congress has been a political business in the name of poverty and poverty alleviation. He also talked about Indira Gandhi in his statement. Let's listen in.
A complete eyewash. वायदा क्या था? चुनाव जीतने के लिए धोखा देना गरीब को और उसके बाद साधन न देना। ये कांग्रेस पार्टी का इतिहास रहा है कि गरीब को नारे दो, साधन मत दो। इन गरीब परिवारों को जो नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने दिया है, वो आज की तारीख में है 5.34 लाख करोड़, जो आज दिया जा रहा है। तो ये कौन सा 3.6 लाख करोड़ डीबीटी के माध्यम से देकर आप गरीब पे एहसान कर रहे हो?
Well, joining us on NDTV this evening, we have Praveen Chakravarti, the head of the Data Analytics Department for the Congress Party. Lalita Kumaramangalam of the BJP is with us. Mr. Yogendra Yadav, the National President of Swaraj India. We have Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist with Care Ratings, and Senior Journalist Smita Gupta here in the studio with us. Praveen Chakravarti, to you first. There's a lot of confusion about how the numbers actually add up as far as this scheme is concerned. Now, what Rahul Gandhi basically said was that it's 72,000 rupees a year for 20% of these poorest families. That comes to about 6,000 rupees a month. And he also talks about a minimum income of 12,000 rupees a month. So that maths is not adding up for a lot of people. If you could explain what it means actually.
Yeah, sure. It's actually quite simple. The bottom 20% or the poorest 20% of families in India will be given 72,000 rupees a year. That's the scheme. That's NYAY. That's the scheme. Now, these poor families are earning some amount today. They're already earning some income, either through Narega or other means. These, with the addition of 6,000 rupees, this would then mean that most Indian families will earn at least 12,000 rupees a month in India. That is, there will be no Indian family that will earn less than 12,000 rupees a month. So this is the implication of this scheme. What is the scheme? The scheme is very clear. It is 72,000 rupees a year to the poorest 20% of Indian households. That's 5 crore households. By implication, this would mean that every family in India can now say that they will earn at least 12,000 rupees a month. So that's the implication. So let us not mix the two.
Okay, so I'm presuming that you're saying this based on studies the party would have done, economists it would have spoken to about what basic income people are earning at the moment, based on which you're essentially saying that the Congress is promising to top up that income. My next question then though is the cost. What is this actually going to cost every year?
Sure. Let me just explain to you how we've arrived at this. This is not an idea that was kind of cooked up, last minute. It's an idea that we've been working on for the last 4 months. There are experts from India and abroad that we've consulted with, that we've worked very closely with. We've looked at the data very, very closely, and the scheme that we have come out with, which is a uniform amount of 6,000 rupees a month or 72,000 rupees a year for every poor family in the bottom 20%. So that's the background, and hence, yes, we have all of the data and we've done all of the work around this. Now, in terms of how we plan to think about this once we come to government in May, I think the first and foremost really is, as you know, we will form a committee of experts that will design the idea, that will detail out the implementation plan. We will then have to take the states along with it. This is obviously will be a federal scheme, and then there will be pilots that will be rolled out, and then this scheme will be rolled out in phases. So we have
cost?
to, when we start talking about costs,
Yeah.
we have to think about a phased approach of rollout, right? So depending on the implementation the implementation plan, the costs will be arrived at on an annual basis. So at this point in time, I can't tell you what the year 1 cost will be or the year 2 cost will be, because that will be a little premature. I think we've detailed out the plan. We've also told you how we were going to roll it out, and we've also given the amount and the total number of beneficiaries.
Okay. Before I come ask you more questions on that, Yogendra Yadav, you had written, extensively when Rahul Gandhi earlier this year had first announced the idea of this scheme, and you were very clear that while it may be a good idea on paper, it needed to be fleshed out. You needed to have details, what the minimum income would be, and now that has happened. Now, do you think that this is an idea that can work, or are you, like some of us, still a little confused about what this is actually going to end up costing? The exchequer, will this mean more taxes for people? Where the money will come from? Mr. Yogendra
Yadav. 2 reasons why I would welcome this declaration. One, because it brings this election back to basics. So we are not counting the number of aeroplanes. We are not counting how many terrorists were killed in Balakot. Instead, we are discussing, as we should. We are debating something real, substantive, that really affects lives of crores of people in this country, number 1. Number 2, because this announcement at least begins to acknowledge that the poor need a stimulus. For these 2 reasons, I would welcome this scheme. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Yadav. Go ahead. Mr. Yadav, go ahead. We can hear you.
We've lost the signal.
All right, we just try to fix that. I think Mr. Yadav can't hear us. We could hear him clearly. Lalita Kumaramangalam, just to get the BJP's perspective on this, Mr. Jaitley was quick to say that the Congress has a history of making slogans on poverty issues, etc. But just let me ask you this. The point that Yogendra Yadav very briefly raised, that the conversation in this election seems to have gone back to economics and to these very sort of bread and butter basic issues, from national security. How do you see it? Okay, I think we have lost. I think we've lost the lines. Okay, we've lost all those lines. So Smita Gupta, it's you and me in conversation until those lines come back up. The joys of technology and television. Politically, does this actually mark a shift in the narrative? Does this actually mark a move, away from that national security narrative that we've been seeing for so many days?
I think it does. I think that's the most important thing about it, is that now we are again talking about real issues, as Mr. Yogendra Yadav pointed out. Secondly, in India still, given the levels of poverty, I don't think any political party can afford to ignore the poor. If I just take you back 2-3 years, when Mr. Rahul Gandhi had used that phrase, "Soot boot ki sarkar," which one would say was just one of those frivolous little phrases, but it upset the BJP enough and it upset Mr. Modi enough for him to actually change the way he dressed, because he realized that, and
This
and
was
that
catching on.
And that was the beginning of him trying to refashion his government as a pro-poor government. So I think it's been a smart move, and I think it's far better. It's a promise. I don't know how it will be fulfilled, but I still think it's a far more doable promise than the 15 lakhs to people, to everybody that Mr. Modi promised.
Did you also find it interesting, though, that when Rahul Gandhi held this press conference today on this issue, he was asked a question on Rafale, on which he's been holding press conferences fairly frequently, and he said today that I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to focus on this. So do you see perhaps a hint there that even within the Congress party, there's a sense now that maybe Rafale has a limited sort of effect in terms of how it works as a campaign issue, and the time had come to keep the focus back on the issue of jobs, poverty, rural distress, etc.?
I think so, because I think post Balakot bombings, the narrative, before Balakot happened, the narrative seemed to be changing to the subjects that you mentioned: rural distress, negative impact of demonetization, etc. But with the Balakot bombings, the narrative changed completely. Now to just hammer on about Rafale, where there may be a scam, there is probably a big scam. But for the Congress party, when people make comparisons between Rafale and Bofors, the fact is Mr. VP Singh had huge credibility. That's why the Bofors, the attack on the Bofors thing flew. But it wasn't resonating, Rafale wasn't resonating in the same way. So Mr. Gandhi needed a big bang idea, which would be able to, make an impact nationally. And especially, one last thing, especially when you compare it, the amount that has been promised, when it is compared with what Mr. Modi has promised farmers, he has promised 6,000 rupees a year. This is 72,000 rupees a year.
This is 6,000 rupees a month, that's 6,000 rupees a year. But Praveen Chakravarti, just coming, back to this political question as well. It's interesting also that Rahul Gandhi, in a sense, has borrowed from his grandmother today, who almost 50 years ago, talked about garibi hatao. Is that, you think, a very conscious decision that has been taken to sort of change the focus and shift it away even from an issue like Rafale?
No, I think all of this is conjecture. It was very clear that this was an announcement that was not made just today. There was the first announcement of this came a few months ago, and at that time we made it very clear that the details will be revealed as and when we have worked out all the details, and that's what we did today. I think to kind of impute and imply that this would mean that we are giving up on some other on another topic such as Rafale is just mere conjecture at this point in time. This is an economic idea. It's a big, bold, audacious economic idea for which the time is come. We believe that in today's India, a bold idea such as this, given our size of our economy and given our fiscal capacity, we will be able to launch this final attack on poverty. And the other important point I want to point out is very few people have actually talked about what it can do to the larger economy.
Praveen, just give me a second. I'll just come back to you on that bigger point that you're trying to make, because we have Yogendra Yadav's line back up with us. Apologies, Mr. Yadav, for the technical fault. You were making an important point when we lost that line. But do you agree with Rahul Gandhi's sort of slogan that this is a final assault on poverty? Does this actually have the potential to take people out of poverty? I mean, that still has to be tested. That's a very big claim to make.
I think Rahul Gandhi may have learned something from Mr. Modi about making these things historic, final assault and so on. Just as I saw Mr. Arun Jaitley learn something about fraudulent electoral promises. I'm very happy that both of them have learned something from each other. To my mind, the important thing, as I said, was number one, it brings this election back to basics. Number two, there is an acknowledgement that the poor in this country need a stimulus. It's not just corporate houses, it's not just industries, the poor need a stimulus. There are two questions, if they have been answered, forgive me. One question is this scheme going to supplement all the pro-poor schemes that do exist, or will it substitute? That's what we need to know. Number two, where will the additional money come from? I don't think there's much confusion about calculations. It will cost 3.6 lakh crore rupees, which is a little less than 2% of our GDP. This would require some additional taxations, or will it come from somewhere else? These are two questions we need to know. There are a couple of disagreements to begin with. I personally think rather than giving 6,000 rupees per family to 5%, I'd rather give 3,000 to 10% families, to 10 crore families. And also there is a serious question about whether direct income transfer is a smarter way or strengthening of basic services is a smarter way. But all these questions should be debated. Let's debate it. No matter which conclusion we reach, at least we are debating what we ought to be debating in elections, and that's why I welcome this move.
Lalita Kumaramangalam, apologies to you and the other guests for the technical difficulties we've had this evening. But Ms. Kumaramangalam, just to ask you again, on the point that Yogendra Yadav is making, that while we debate the merits and demerits of what Rahul Gandhi has announced, the important thing is that the political conversation has come back to the economy. What would you say?
Nidhi, I would say that, well, temporarily it has come back, it looks like, to the economy. But I think it would also be too hasty for us to say that issues such as national security are not important to the country. Now, coming back to the great announcement or the historic announcement that Rahul Gandhi has made today, the announcement per se, there doesn't seem to be much wrong with it. But the fact is it merely just a pre-poll announcement that is competing, as all of you, the earlier panelists have said, with Mr. Modi's announcement of 2,000 rupees per quarter for the farmers, or is it actually something that can be implemented? Now, it's easy to make tall promises, but implementation is where the problem comes in. Firstly, it's not about 3.5 lakh crores, it's about nearer 4 lakh crores. And what Yogendra Yadav asked is the question that everybody is asking, that is this going to supplement, or is it going to be a separate, or is it going to, absorb all the other direct benefit transfers that are going on now, through which I think approximately a little over a lakh is already reaching the poor. The second most important thing here is, how are we going to identify the poor? India does not have a great record on statistics or on identification. Remember, this was one of the biggest problems when Manrega was rolled out, and it continues to be one of the biggest problems today. So, who is going to make the identification? How are we going to identify? The third thing that I must point out here that I think has not been pointed out earlier is that in order to really mitigate or rule out, or as Rahul Gandhi said, make sure that there is no poverty in India at all, we can't just bring in a dole that will supplement the income of the most poor in the country. There has to be an enormous amount of additional expenditure on various things. Infrastructure, expenditure on infrastructure must continue, education, health, railways,
so you're
defense, etc.
that it's expensive.
And has all this been taken into account? Just saying that we'll somehow find the money, the 4 lakh or 3.5 lakh crores, 1,00,000 crores is not enough. And just also saying that we'll increase taxes or will not increase taxes, or say that we will somehow maintain fiscal prudence, is just not enough. Remember that even the person whom everybody is saying is actually going to be or has been in the thick and thin of this planning the scheme, Mr. Chidambaram, when he first became finance minister in UPA 1, had exerted an enormous amount of fiscal tightening.
So
once he left,
you've raised some very pertinent, points that I'd like to take to Praveen in just a moment.
But if fiscal prudence is not kept,
Yeah.
No, just one more point let me
Yeah.
make. If we are not able to maintain fiscal prudence, then the ensuing inflation will wipe out the gains of the 72,000 rupees a year.
Madan Sabnawis, are you concerned as an economist about sort of the financial implications of this sort of competitive populism?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we need a bit more clarity about this overall expenditure of 3.5 lakh crores. Because if you really look at the way in which the overall size of a budget has moved, I think on an annual basis today it's currently around 3.5 lakh crore rupees. So last year it was 24 lakh crores, now it's around 27.5 lakh crores, which means that incrementally is it a case of saying that whatever is going to be the increase in your overall size of the budget is going to go for this particular program? Or alternatively, as some of the other guests have already spoken of, it will be more a case of amalgamation of certain existing schemes, something like your subsidies, maybe something on your the pension programs, the insurance programs for farmers, they may all be merged. Because if you go back to the basic thought behind this kind of a thing is that if we agree ideologically that a DBT is the right way of helping the poor, then I think this is a kind of an extension, and one can always justify saying that we stop the subsidies, we stop all these insurance, the Ayushman, etc. can be stopped and merged into a cash benefit which is given to the individual, and the individual could take a decision about where to spend the money. So I think it will have to be more likely a combination of this, because I don't think the budget on its own would be able to accommodate this kind of an amount.
Well, Praveen Chakravarti, do you want to take some of those concerns that the panelists have raised? So, number one, I was going to ask you about the 3.6 lakh crores that Yogendra Yadav first talked about, because you're not giving us a figure. And I don't know why, because when you just do the mathematics on the calculator, this figure comes up. Now, why aren't you committing to this figure? And how are we going to pay for this? I mean, will the Congress at least say that, yes, we'll have to raise taxes? I mean, how else is this money going to come? And will other schemes be subsumed? Will they be done away with? Can you just give some clarity on the bigger plan here?
Yeah, sure. Those all valid questions. Remember, let's set all of this in context. We are right now at a stage where we're an opposition party, and we have come out with an economic idea for the country, for India's poor, and it's at the manifesto stage. We're not writing a cabinet note for implementation. The last time I checked, 2 years ago, the Prime Minister of the country stood up on Red Fort and said we will double farmers' incomes. Do you know the math behind it? I still don't. I don't know if you do. And that is in government. So I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. There are things that we have clearly promised, which is that this is the amount which is 72,000 rupees a year for 5 crore. Yes, at its peak, if you just do a simple math, it is 3.5 lakh, 3.6 lakh crores. If you roll it out in phases, then what will be the annual cost? What will it be as a percentage of GDP? All of that will vary. Like I said, all of this will be in the implementation detail. Second, I think the Congress President also made it very clear in the press conference that we will adhere to fiscal discipline. There will be fiscal prudence that we will be concerned about, and we will adhere to that. So I think with these two broad pillars, now this is not an idea that is suddenly come up. It's actually this government's own former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam, who mooted this idea in 2017, but he was ignored, and instead we got demonetization. So I think, it's not something that, we came up with as a poll promise or some pre-poll announcement or some, false promises or any of that. It's a very sound economic idea that's been discussed, debated world over for a long time. The government's own Chief Economic Advisor has been propagating this idea for some time. And we have laid out the contours.
If it's a sound economic idea, then people...
We've also made a commitment that we will be...
Sure, but people would want to know how you're planning to pay for it. So you're not answering that question either. How are you going to pay for this?
Nidhi, we're not, like I said, we are not writing a cabinet note for implementation. Do we know the implementation details? We know the amount. We know what we're going to do. We know how we're going to pay for it. Right? I mean, these questions about how will you identify beneficiaries, how will we pay for it? It is our belief that through a combination of revenue and expenditure, we will be able to meet this over a certain time frame and keeping fiscal prudence in check. Right?
Okay.
This issue about targeted beneficiaries, today Ayushman Bharat claims that it targets 10 crore poor families. How do they target?
No, of course. In fact, I was going to ask Yogendra Yadav that. The fact is that there is a Kisan scheme, in place. Yogendra Yadav, quick last word to you. I mean, they've identified beneficiaries who, there is a way to identify that. I don't think that's the most pressing question. But do you think that the Congress needs to have a clearer plan to present to the people, or this is good enough?
I think we need and deserve a clearer plan. Of course, it's a poll promise. Of course, it's a response to BJP, and I don't mind it. That's what elections are about. But I mind someone saying that because Mr. Modi can get away with jumlas, don't ask me questions. Of course, when Mr. Modi announced that thing about doubling of farmers' income, there was no maths. Even to this day, there is zero maths behind it. Unfortunately, the media in our country has not interrogated it closely. Of course, when Mr. Modi says all farmers will get 6,000 rupees, there is not one database in this country that has a list of farmers. He should have been interrogated. That does not mean that Congress should not be interrogated. I think we should interrogate every single claim that might encourage the media in this country to begin to interrogate the ruling party as well. But this is a very good debate, and I would want that interrogation to take place so that we are wiser as a voter and we are not duped. There is a reason why Mr. Modi is called a Jumla man and a Feku man. And if the opposition wants to occupy the same space, the media should not permit them to do so.
I think there
the
will
public
be a lot
should not
more.
permit
There'll
them
be a
to
lot.
do so.
There'll be a lot more to debate on
everyone
this.
is what elections are all about.
There is a lot more to debate on this in the coming days. Thank you to all of you for joining us.
I completely agree with.
I'm out of time, Praveen, but like I said, I think we'll have to have a look at this in far greater detail over the next few days on how this will actually work out on the ground, particularly when you look at this juxtaposed with the government's own schemes that are currently in place. So thank you to all of you for joining us.